On December 16, 1915, a 36-year-old British politician stood inside 10 Downing Street, dragged his finger across a map of the Ottoman Empire, and told the Prime Minister, "I should like to draw a line from the E in Acre to the last K in Kirkuk." 30 million people left entirely stateless. 4 secret treaties that sliced an ancient world into pieces, and a 600-mile geographical scar that still burns today. How did a single, arbitrary line drawn in secret by 2 European aristocrats engineer a century of unending bloodshed? This is a story about the single decision that could have prevented everything. A fork in the road where the fate of millions hung in the balance. The choice was simple: honor a promise made to the people who lived there, or steal the ground beneath their feet. Britain and France chose theft. They didn't do it for sand. They did it for something buried beneath the dirt that was about to change the global economy forever. To understand how the trap was set, you have to look at the man holding the pen. Sir Mark Sykes suffered from a very specific fatal flaw: imperial hubris, the arrogant belief that a complex, ancient mosaic of tribes, faiths, and bloodlines could be permanently tamed by a ruler and a red pencil. It is 1915. World War I is raging. The Ottoman Empire controls the Middle East, and they are fighting against the British. Britain needs a localized uprising to distract the Ottoman army. So they send an intelligence agent named T.E. Lawrence into the desert. History remembers him as Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence strikes a deal with the Arab leaders. Fight the Ottomans for us, and when we win, you get a unified, independent Arab state. The Arabs bleed for the British. They blow up trains. They take crucial ports. But while Lawrence is out in the sand making promises, Mark Sykes is secretly sitting in London, selling that exact same land to the French. Sykes meets with French diplomat François Georges-Picot. Together, they pull out a map. Picot wants the Mediterranean coast. Sykes wants the inland desert. So Sykes draws his infamous 600-mile line, from Acre in modern-day Israel, straight across the sand to Kirkuk in modern-day Iraq. Everything north of the line goes to France. Everything south of the line goes to Britain. Why this specific line? Because Kirkuk wasn't just dust. It was the eastern anchor of the newly discovered Baba Gurgur oil fields. And Acre was a deep-water port on the Mediterranean Sea. The line wasn't a border. It was a 600-mile pipeline route designed to pump inland oil straight into the belly of the British naval fleet. On May 16, 1916, Sykes crossed the point of no return. He signed the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement. The double cross was complete, but there was a fatal problem with the map Sykes and Picot had just colored in. They didn't actually own the land they were giving away. If you want to understand the hidden mechanisms that actually run the world, World Decoded exposes one of these covert systems every week. Hit subscribe. 2 years later, the Great War ended. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, and the secret leaked. When the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia, they found a copy of the Sykes-Picot Treaty in the Tsar's archives and published it for the world to see. The Arabs realized they had fought and died for a lie. Britain and France didn't care. They brought their armies and carved up the map anyway. They legitimized their theft through a series of treaties, ending at Lausanne in 1923. But look closely at the nations they invented. They created a new country called Iraq. To do it, they took 3 distinct Ottoman provinces that had hated eachism for centuries. Basra in the south, populated by Shia Muslims. Baghdad in the center, dominated by Sunni Muslims. And Mosul in the north, home to the Kurds. What happens when you force 3 rival bloodlines into a single cage and call it a country? They fight. And that was exactly the point. The new borders of Iraq and Syria deliberately grouped bitter sectarian rivals together. It ensured these new artificial nations would remain internally fractured. If the locals were busy fighting each other over dominance, they would be entirely dependent on Western military administrators to keep the peace. Britain appointed a Sunni king to rule over a Shia majority in Iraq. France favored the Alawite minority to control the Sunni majority in Syria. It was classic divide and conquer, institutionalized into the very geography of the Middle East. By 1920, the entire region was on fire. The empires had successfully divided the Middle East, but in doing so, they had trapped themselves inside a geopolitical powder keg of their own design. For decades, historians debated whether Mark Sykes just made a terrible mistake. He didn't. The violent instability of the modern Middle East wasn't a failure of British and French mapmaking. It was the intended design. They prioritized oil transit routes over human geography. If the map was a closely guarded secret, who was going to tell the millions of people whose ancestral homes had just been sliced in half? You wake up, your borders have moved. Your brothers are now foreigners. Listen to what it actually cost.
This is a Kurdish civilian, reflecting on the Treaty of Lausanne that solidified these colonial borders.
The Kurds were promised a homeland. Instead, they were sliced into 4 different countries: Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Today, they are the largest stateless nation on Earth. 30 million people, erased by a single pen stroke. If you want to see exactly how these borders dictate the wars happening today, World Decoded connects these dots every single week. Subscribe. To hold these artificial borders together, the new nations required absolute brutality. Because the countries were fake, they could only be ruled by force. For a century, Iraq and Syria have been plagued by coups, dictators, and civil wars. All because of a map drawn in a room in London. Sir Mark Sykes died in 1919. He succumbed to the Spanish flu at the age of 39. He never lived to see the Middle East he invented. But a century later, millions of people are still dying for his map. Sykes wasn't the only aristocrat to carve up a continent with a pen. 20 years earlier, a similar map was drawn for Africa by a king who turned a rainforest into a slaughterhouse. Subscribe to World Decoded. Next time, the deadly secret keeping America out of Iran. Subscribe, you do not want to miss it.